The moment the spotlight hit and the words began to flow, it was clear that the commentary wasn't going to be light or forgettable. There was a sharpness to the tone, a deliberate edge that turned what could have been a casual jab into something far more explosive. The statement wasn't just tossed out. It was aimed, precise, meant to provoke. There was no mistaking the intent. It was designed to stir the room, to challenge the unspoken rules of what's off limits, especially when it comes to the private lives of public figures. And the target, in this case, happened to be one of the most watched yet often silent personalities in the public eye. What stood out wasn't just the content of the claim, it was the delivery. The speaker didn't just insinuate or suggest, they declared. There was no room left for ambiguity. It was a bold claim, made with confidence, crafted to leave an impact. It played to the crowd, sure, but it also dug deep into a narrative that many have speculated on, but few have addressed so directly in public. The words sliced through the usual polite commentary like a hot knife through butter, daring anyone to challenge them. It was almost like a dare. I said it. Now what? The reaction, of course, was immediate. There was shock, amusement, even discomfort, exactly the mix of emotions that such a statement is meant to elicit. It pulled people into the moment, demanded attention, and made sure nobody could walk away without forming an opinion. Some saw it as brutally honest, others saw it as unnecessarily invasive, but no one saw it as dull. That's the kind of power a moment like this holds. It makes everything else fade into the background. The focus shifts, conversation sparks, and suddenly, it's the only thing anyone's talking about. But what makes it even more potent is the cultural undertone beneath the words. This wasn't just about a relationship. It was about symbolism, about public perception, about the way we dissect those in positions of visibility. The speaker knew exactly which buttons to push and did so with precision. The idea wasn't just to poke fun, it was to crack open a bigger conversation, even if that meant stepping into uncomfortable territory. There's a kind of performance, in that, a calculated risk, where controversy isn't just tolerated, it's welcomed, even needed. The choice of target wasn't accidental either. The individual being discussed is known for maintaining an air of distance, often silent in the face of speculation. That silence creates a vacuum, and vacuums demand to be filled. So when someone steps up and voices the things people whisper about but never say out loud, it creates a shockwave. It turns the quiet mystery into a public spectacle, and whether you agree with the method or not, the effect is undeniable. What complicates things is that the claim wasn't entirely new. Versions of it have floated around in tabloids, in private conversations, on speculative blogs. But there's a difference between rumors whispered in corners and statements blasted on stage with full awareness of their reach. The shift from rumor to statement changes everything. It brings a new weight, a new level of responsibility, or irresponsibility, depending on how you see it. That's where the eruption comes in, because once it's out there, you can't take it back. The line has been crossed, the dice rolled, and the consequences begin to unfold. Even in the delivery, there was a rhythm that suggested this wasn't just off the cuff. It felt rehearsed, intentional, crafted for maximum impact. You could tell there was a sense of timing to it, a sense that this would land at the exact moment people were most likely to be paying attention. That's the genius and the danger of moments like this. They're built like fireworks, beautiful to some, reckless to others, but always loud. And once they explode, everyone is left staring at the smoke, trying to decide what just happened and what it means moving forward. It's moments like these that remind us just how thin the line can be between commentary and controversy, between truth-telling and spectacle. The ripple effects go far beyond the original statement. They spark debates on free speech, on respect, on the cost of fame, and the ethics of dragging someone else's personal life into the spotlight. But none of that changes the simple fact that in the heat of the moment, with all eyes locked in, someone chose to go there, and it landed like a thunderclap. The response wasn't delayed, hesitant, or watered down. It was immediate, clear, and powerful. There was no waiting for permission, no checking the political winds. As soon as the remarks surfaced, the clapback came in full force. It wasn't just a defense. It was a full frontal assertion of principle, delivered with the kind of confidence that doesn't ask for validation. The energy behind it wasn't just about outrage, it was about setting a boundary, drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This is where you stop." There was an unmistakable sense of precision in the words chosen. Every sentence carried weight. This wasn't about being reactive, it was about being strategic. The goal wasn't to mirror the original tone, but to counter it with clarity and purpose. It wasn't about screaming louder, it was about speaking smarter. And in that delivery, there was a deliberate refusal to play the same game. Instead of descending into mockery or emotional volatility, the response was grounded in conviction, rooted in values that demanded respect, especially when discussing someone's personal life. She made it known that there's a line between entertainment and character assassination, between commentary and cruelty, and that line, in her view, had been crossed. By calling it out, she wasn't just defending an individual, she was standing up for a broader principle. A principle that says public figures might be fair game in many areas, but dignity and decency still matter. The message was simple. You don't get to use your platform to casually tear someone down and walk away without being challenged. What gave her words even more punch was the calmness in their delivery. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't designed for shock value. It was measured but firm, a style that commands attention without begging for it. In that calm, there was strength, a confidence that doesn't need to shout to be heard. It stood in stark contrast to the noise it was responding to, and in doing so, it forced people to pause and listen. She didn't just speak for herself, she tapped into a sentiment that many people share but don't often express. The idea that respect should never be considered outdated, and that certain lines shouldn't be crossed just because they make for a good headline. In taking that stand, she became more than just a political figure responding to a controversial moment. She became a voice for boundaries, for restraint, for pushing back when the conversation veers into territory that feels deliberately harmful or exploitative. And it wasn't just about tone or message, it was about timing. She responded when the moment was still hot, when the noise was still echoing. That kind of timing matters. It signals that you're not afraid to step in while the dust is still in the air, while everyone else is still trying to make sense of what just happened. It takes a certain type of presence to do that, to walk into the fire rather than wait for it to die down. What also stood out was her refusal to let the moment become a spectacle. She didn't add fuel to the fire for the sake of clicks or applause. She focused the attention back on the real issue, the way we treat people in public discourse. She reminded everyone that being clever or famous doesn't give anyone a free pass to demean others, especially under the guise of just joking or just saying what people are thinking. That kind of clarity is rare, and it hit hard. In me, a world where responses are often overly cautious or entirely performative, hers was refreshingly direct. It wasn't sanitized, but it wasn't reckless either. It had the kind of balance that's hard to pull off, holding someone accountable, without becoming vindictive, defending someone's dignity without turning the moment into a personal feud. The response also carried a subtle but important message about strength. Not the loud, aggressive kind, but the kind that's rooted in conviction, values, and an unwavering sense of what's right. It reminded people that there's power in standing up, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's uncomfortable. Because that's when it matters most. That's when silence becomes complicity. When tensions flare in the public arena, there's always a moment when things tip from disagreement into full-blown conflict. In this case, that moment came quickly, almost instantly, as if the spark had been waiting to ignite. What started as a sharp comment turned into a blazing exchange that no one could ignore. The energy shifted, the tone hardened, and suddenly, it wasn't just about a single remark. It was about what that remark represented and how forcefully it was answered. There was no slow build-up, no gradual escalation. It was a sudden collision of strong personalities, strong opinions, and a public hungry for drama. The clash became the centerpiece of the moment. Every platform, TV, podcasts, social media, latched onto it, dissecting each word, tone, and reaction. What made it so volatile wasn't just the content, but the speed and intensity with which the response came. There was no pause to regroup or strategize. It was immediate, raw, and charged. The person on the receiving end didn't just absorb the hit, they sent a shockwave back, one that reverberated across media cycles and forced a shift in the narrative. In the process, the conversation mutated. What began as a comment about someone's personal life quickly became a broader battle over respect, decorum, and the boundaries of public discourse. It stopped being about individuals and started becoming about ideas. Everyone watching had to take a stance, whether they supported the boldness of speaking without filters or backed the defense of privacy and personal dignity. It divided audiences, but more importantly, it drew them in. This wasn't just another spat, it was a moment of cultural friction. And those are the moments that stick. The moments that draw people out of passive scrolling and into heated comment sections, because the stakes feel higher, because suddenly it's not just about entertainment, it's about where the line is drawn. When someone claps back with confidence and control, it reshapes the dynamic. It sends a message that certain jabs won't go unanswered, and that there are still people willing to stand in the middle of the storm and call things out, as they see them. There was also something distinctly modern about how it played out. It wasn't confined to a single space. Within hours, clips were circulating, reactions were posted, and the internet did what it does best: amplify. Everyone had an opinion. Influencers weighed in. Analysts tried to frame it. Memes started to circulate, some mocking, some supportive. And yet beneath all the noise, the core remained unchanged. Someone spoke up, someone clapped back, and neither side blinked. The heat of the clash didn't die down quickly. It simmered. And that's partly because the response wasn't just reactive, it was rooted in deeper beliefs. It wasn't delivered just to win the moment, but to push back against something perceived as wrong. There was passion in the rebuttal, yes, but also purpose. That combination made it feel less like a publicity stunt and more like a stand being taken. When someone responds like that, with conviction instead of chaos, it gives their words staying power. It transforms the moment from something sensational into something meaningful. And yet, it didn't come without risk. Stepping into a high-profile, controversy always brings backlash. There are always those who will twist words, question motives, or label strong responses as overreactions. But that didn't seem to matter. The person responding didn't flinch or soften their stance for comfort's sake. Instead, they held firm, using the moment not just to defend, but to challenge the culture that allows such commentary to go unchecked. This kind of back and forth, while messy, is often where real conversations begin. It strips away the filters and reveals what people are really thinking about respect, about power, about what's fair game in the public arena. And sometimes, it takes a clash this loud to break through the noise. It's not always clean. It's not always graceful, but it's real. And in a world where so much is manufactured and performative, authenticity, even when it's confrontational, tends to resonate louder than anything else. What unfolded wasn't just an argument. It was a cultural flashpoint, a live wire that exposed tensions many feel but rarely say. And the fact that it escalated so quickly only made it more captivating. People couldn't look away. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was honest. And in that honesty, there was power. What unfolded wasn't just about a single moment or a provocative statement, it tapped into something far larger. It reached beyond gossip and into a cultural crossroads where public scrutiny, personal boundaries, and entertainment collide. When someone makes a bold comment about another person's private life, especially someone who typically stays reserved and outside the chaos, it sparks more than a passing reaction. It becomes a reflection of where society stands when it comes to how we treat those in the spotlight. That's why this wasn't simply about one marriage or one opinion. It became a lens through which broader issues were suddenly in focus. In many ways, the conversation that erupted said more about the people engaging with it than the people it was about. It highlighted the divide between those who believe that public figures should accept constant commentary as part of the deal, and those who argue that even public lives deserve personal respect. That debate is never far from the surface, but it usually simmers quietly until something loud enough brings it boiling over. And this moment did exactly that. It turned private speculation into a public spectacle, and then into a cultural debate. At the center of that debate was a question of limits. Where is the line? Is everything fair game once someone enters the public arena? Or is there still a place for boundaries, for discretion, for grace? These aren't just questions about media or politics. They're questions about empathy, about our appetite for drama, and about how far people are willing to go to entertain, provoke, or expose. In this case, that line was crossed in a way that forced people to react, to pick a side, and to examine their own views about what should and shouldn't be said in public spaces. The situation also brought attention to how women, especially those in high-profile roles adjacent to power, are often treated differently. There's a tendency to project assumptions onto them, to strip them of agency by speculating endlessly about their motivations, their relationships, and their inner lives, without any of the nuance or fairness that such topics deserve. The silence of the individual being discussed only added to the public's fascination, as if the lack of a public voice somehow justified filling in the blanks. But the response from a political ally, measured, strong, unapologetic, disrupted that narrative. It reminded everyone that just because someone doesn't speak out doesn't mean they should be spoken for. This wasn't just a defense of a person. It was a defense of a principle. The principle that public discourse still has a responsibility to uphold dignity, that making headlines should never come at the cost of dragging someone's personal life into public ridicule. That kind of stance isn't always popular, especially in a climate that thrives on outrage and viral moments. But it's necessary. It pushes back against the idea that the only voices that matter are the loudest or the most provocative. Another dimension to the situation was how quickly the conversation expanded beyond traditional media. Social media platforms exploded with commentary, memes, and hot takes. People weren't just consuming the story. They were shaping it, reacting to it in real time, turning the moment into a referendum on everything from free speech to decency to gender dynamics in public life. The speed and scale of that response showed how closely audiences are paying attention, how quickly they're willing to engage, and how much power a single moment can have when it hits the right nerve. The intensity of the public's reaction also showed just how hungry people are for authenticity, not just spectacle, but substance. The fact that the response to the original remark came with conviction, not theatrics, gave people something to rally behind. It wasn't about matching insult with insult. It was about offering a clear moral contrast. That kind of clarity stands out in a world where most people are trying to play it safe, appeal to everyone, or avoid controversy altogether. Ultimately, the moment served as a cultural mirror. It reflected back the values people hold about respect, power, relationships, and the role of public figures. It raised questions that aren't easily answered, but are essential to ask. What do we owe each other in how we speak? When does commentary become cruelty? And what happens when someone finally says, enough? The reaction proved that even in a time saturated with noise, the right words, spoken with purpose, can still cut through and make people stop, think, and feel. In the end, what began as a fleeting remark spiraled into a larger cultural moment, one that peeled back the layers of modern discourse and revealed the tension simmering just beneath the surface. It wasn't merely a matter of one person making a comment and another responding. It was a full demonstration of how fast words can travel, how deeply they can cut, and how quickly a single exchange can evolve into a broader public reckoning. This moment served as a reminder that words have weight, especially when amplified by fame, media, and an audience that's always watching. In today's landscape, where every statement can be replayed, clipped, and shared to millions within minutes, the stakes are higher than ever. What might once have stayed within the walls of a comedy club or the pages of a tabloid now has the power to ignite nationwide discussions about decency, personal boundaries, and respect. What also stood out was the clear contrast in approach between provocation and principle. One side chose to provoke, leaning into shock value to make a point or grab attention. The other side chose to stand firm, not through rage or retaliation, but through clarity, composure, and conviction. That contrast made the moment feel not just reactive but transformative. It invited people to think about how we talk about others, what we choose to make jokes about, and how far is too far when it comes to public commentary. It also brought attention to how women in particular are spoken about, often objectified, simplified, or speculated on without context or compassion. The response in this case acted as a firm reminder that these narratives can be challenged, that silence does not equal weakness, and that respect must be demanded, not just hoped for. In a culture that often rewards controversy more than character, it's powerful when someone chooses to speak up not to stir the pot, but to restore balance. That's what made this moment resonate. It wasn't just about clapping back. It was about setting a tone for what kind of discourse we want to see more of. And while people may continue to disagree on where the line should be drawn, the fact that the conversation happened at all means something important. It means that people still care about the line. They're still watching, still listening, still deciding what kind of voices they want to elevate. Ultimately, the firestorm that followed was more than entertainment. It was a reflection of values, of choices, and of where we are as a society and how we treat one another, especially in public view. And for every moment of noise, there are still voices willing to rise above it, not to shout, but to steady the conversation, to bring it back, to center, and to remind us that strength doesn't always come from speaking first. It often comes from responding with purpose.